Eagles fans should be concerned, but not panicked about the Jalen Hurts injury. I really, the panic, I'm sure, Ben, you're on text threads or messages with it. People are flipping out. People are not flipping out. You're trying to get a gauge on how concerned you should be if you're the Eagles or an Eagles fan right now. So let's get the details of this. End of the third quarter, Eagles run a little zone read. Travis Gibson lands on Hurts. His right shoulder kind of gets crunched into the ground. Ben, I said it on the Ringers Philly special show. It's the first time I can remember this year where Jalen Hurts was slow to get up after a play. And this is a guy who's the ball is in his hands a lot on pretty much every play. He's running the ball, he's passing the ball, and this was the first time. So he's got the shoulder sprain. How long is he going to be out? I think Jeff McClain of the Inquirer said he's in danger of missing the next 2 games. So here's the thing. On one hand, you can really spin this in a positive way for the Eagles. They are well built to handle this setback. They have built a big lead in the NFC where they just need to win one of their final 3 games at Dallas, home against New Orleans, home against the Giants. They just have to win one and they lock up the 1 seed in the NFC. That's all they need to do. So you can say, you know what? It's not that big of a deal. It comes at an okay time for them. They should be able to win one of those games with or without Hurts. And then you look ahead to the playoffs. Now, that 2-week time period, Ben, that could turn into a 5-week time period because there's a little caveat here. If they clinch, then all of a sudden they're facing an interesting decision about what to do. I mean, if they beat the Cowboys here coming up and they're 6-point underdogs, so they're not supposed to win that game. But if they win that game with Gardner Minshew, they literally have nothing to play for in terms of playoff seeding in the final 2 weeks of the season. So this is a team that is pretty conservative with injuries, with preseason, that kind of thing. You wonder, would they just sit Hurts? And if they do, now all of a sudden, you're talking about going into the divisional round with your starting quarterback having not played football in a game situation in 5 weeks. So you got to balance those 2 things out. So that's kind of where I'm at with this injury. Now, here's my concern. If you're a fan or someone who says, well, no, this is a lot worse than you're making it out to be, Sheil. Here's the deal. My concern is not that they're going to lose the 1 seed. I think they're going to get the 1 seed. Your concern would have to be, does Hurts look like the same guy when he returns? Are they comfortable using him in the designed run game? Will he be rusty in his first game action? Because you know what? That first game action could be against Micah Parsons and the Dallas Cowboys in the divisional round at Lincoln Financial Field. Those are impossible questions to answer, but that's kind of my bigger concern. I think they're going to be fine in terms of playoff positioning. I think they're in a good spot in that he can take his time and come back when he's ready. My concern would be, what does he look like when he comes back? Where are you on sort of the panic meter and what I just laid out in terms of Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, it's funny because when you have a quarterback who's just out for 5 weeks with injury, you don't think about him coming back in the regular season being like, oh, I wonder what the rust will be like. But once you go to playoff time, you're like, oh, I wonder what the rust is going to be like. It starts to become a factor. Like in my head with logic, I'm like, oh, Hurts been playing a lot of football. And get a couple weeks off. It's going to be great. It's going to be a nice break. But then, you're like that panic meter, like you said, goes off, especially because I'm an Eagles fan. And I'm just like, what if he comes back and he takes a couple drives to get ready and he's afraid to get hit? Like, you spiral the whole thing. I agree with you that over the course of the day on Monday, when the betting markets were just moving the lines towards the Cowboys are increasingly becoming favorites, while also Patrick Mahomes was increasingly becoming the favorite for MVP, something he was not on Monday morning and is now as we're recording on Monday evening. And it starts to become clear, like, oh, Jalen Hurts is like, he's hurt after that Bears game. Like, there's something up. You go into a state of total panic, and then now I think, like, with the news, okay, like, strained AC joint in. I've seen the throwing shoulder and I've also seen not the throwing shoulder. So I don't even know if that's
the throwing shoulder. Yeah, it's the throwing shoulder.
Throwing shoulder is what was the main thing I heard, but I'd also seen non-throwing shoulder reports. When you hear that, you go, okay, well, what do quarterbacks do with strained throwing shoulders? And, Jimmy Garoppolo had it, didn't miss any time when he had it back in January. Kyler in 2020 had it, missed no time. Drew Lock in 2020 had it, missed 2 games. CJ Stroud separated his AC joint this year in college and missed no time. Bryce Young missed 1 game with this injury. But also sometimes when those players came back, the velocity on the ball wasn't necessarily there to the same degree, and they're a little bit off throwing. Well, Jalen Hurts played with this injury in the fourth quarter and got a deep ball to AJ Brown, which has kind of been a big part of his role in the Eagles passing game this year. So you kind of gather all the data and you go, all right, you know what? Like, if the Cowboys game were for the division and tied records, would Hurts probably be playing in this game? Yeah. And the Eagles are both lucky and rewarded for the work they've done to put themselves in this spot where they've only lost one game. They've handled their business late. They have gotten out of like week 5 games and week 3 games with wins such that they're protected and they're able to put Gardner Minshew out there. So I think, like, you know, all together, if you're the Eagles, you're like, okay, we've largely dodged bullets this year. Here's one. Let's just be really, really careful with it. The other part of this that's very funny is the Eagles play the Cowboys in week 16. Hated division rival. Cowboys still have a 1% chance to win the division. So you want to win the game, whatever. More valuable to the team is the game they have next week against the New Orleans Saints in week 17, because they could swing in beating the Saints, the Saints first round pick, from like being like 11th or 12th to like a top 5 pick. And the reason why the Saints first round pick matters to the Eagles is because they own it. This is a rare case of a team very late in the season being able to improve their draft position in the first round by winning. That's very interesting. And so I wouldn't even be surprised if we see a little Jalen Hurts out for the Cowboys. Maybe if the Eagles were like, you know, really tactical, they'd like also rest some more starters for the Cowboys and then just throw the starters back in for the Saints game. They're not going to do that. But I think you could see Jalen Hurts miss this week 16 game and then get some week 17 action. Eagles will be incentivized to beat the Saints, and I think will be incentivized to let Hurts, you know, kind of run the shoulder on a Sunday, make sure it looks good. So I think altogether they're fine. It's just you have to walk through the briar patch here a little bit. Just make sure you handle this correctly. This organization very familiar with MVP quarterback late season injuries, so they're going to be cautious and figure it out as best they can moving forward.